Okay, so I want you to close your eyes for just a second. Imagine you were standing in the middle of a mansion, and I don't mean just a nice house.
No, we're talking a sprawling, breathtaking estate.
Exactly. Sprawling.
Yeah.
Crystal skylights, mahogany staircases, gardens. You can see through these massive windows. It is magnificent. But there's a problem.
The people inside.
Right. The residents. They were just stumbling around in total chaos.
Crashing into pillars, falling off balconies.
Dripping into open pits. It sounds like a horror movie. But the thing is, the lights aren't out. The sun is shining.
Mm-hmm.
The reason they're falling is that every single person in that house is wearing a thick black veil over their face.
And the worst part, according to the document we're looking at today, they don't even know they're wearing it. They just think that's how the world looks.
That is the opening metaphor of the source material for our deep dive today. It's a document called Stolen Messiah, written by an author who uses the name Yuval HaTalmud. And I have to be honest with you, this is not a gentle, heartwarming devotional.
Not at all. Forensic investigation is probably the best way to describe it.
Forensic is exactly the right word.
Yeah.
The author frames this as a red pill moment, specifically for modern Christians.
He's writing from a very specific Judaic perspective. It's one that accepts Yeshua, or Jesus, as the Messiah.
But completely rejects the religion that's been built around him.
Completely.
And that distinction is the absolute heartbeat of this whole thing. The source argues that the religion of Yeshua and the religion about Yeshua are not just different.
They're actively fighting each other. He claims modern Christianity is in the middle of an identity crisis it doesn't even know it has. It thinks it's following the Messiah.
But it's actually following Paul.
And the argument isn't just that they had, different styles.
No.
The premise is that they are diametrically opposed. This is the whole stolen Messiah theory. The idea that the Messiah's identity was co-opted, repackaged, and sold back is something totally different.
It is a heavy accusation. And HaTalmud, he does not pull any punches. Right up front, he warns the reader, repent.
Yeah, he says believers are in danger of something he calls lawlessness.
And I have to pause there. Because when I hear lawlessness, I think of anarchy. The purge.
Right. Burning cars, riots.
Difficult chaos.
That's how our modern Western ear hears it. But we have to put on our first century hearing aids. The author points out the Greek term that's used is anomos.
Okay.
To a Jew in the first century, and remember, that's who Yeshua was, that's who his audience was, lawlessness did not mean chaos in the streets. It had a very technical definition.
So what is that definition?
It literally means being without law, specifically without the Torah, without halacha. It's someone who doesn't keep the commandments. The source even uses the term apikoros. In Jewish thought, that's not just an atheist. It's a Jew who knows the Torah but then teaches other people not to follow it.
Okay, so if the text is warning against lawlessness, the source is saying it's really warning against a theology that says the law is obsolete.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this is where the forensic accounting starts. The whole mission of this document is to just place the words of Yeshua right next to the words of Paul.
Just the transcript.
Just the transcripts. And the first exhibit is that very word, lawlessness.
I was looking at this comparison, and it is jarring. So let's look at Matthew 7. This is Yeshua, painting a picture of Judgment Day. People running up to him saying, Lord, Lord, we did miracles in your name. We cast out demons.
These are not non-believers. These are super believers, active in ministry, doing supernatural things.
And Yeshua's response is just chilling. He doesn't say, well done. He says, depart from me. I never knew you.
Why?
Because they are workers of lawlessness.
Workers of anonymous. He kicks them out, not for a lack of faith, they clearly had faith, but for being without law. Now, keep that specific condemnation in your head. And look at Paul's letter to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 9. Paul is explaining his strategy for winning converts, and he writes, to those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law.
Wait. The Greek word there. Don't tell me.
It's anomia, the noun form of the exact same word.
That is very hard to ignore. So Yeshua says, if you are a nomos, get away from me. And Paul says, hey, everyone, just so you know, I am anomia.
That is the linguistic link the source points to. He argues this is not a coincidence, it's a confession. Paul is explicitly claiming the state that Yeshua explicitly condemned.
So the source is basically asking, how can you follow the master while embodying the one thing he says he hates?
Exactly. And usually the argument is that, Paul and Jesus are on the same team. Jesus set the stage. Paul explained the new rules.
Right.
But the source implies they are playing two completely different sports, especially when you look at the durability of the law.
I'm sure you've heard the phrase, Jesus fulfilled the law so we don't have to.
Of course, that's standard doctrine. The law was a burden, and Jesus lifted it.
But the source just points to Matthew 5:17. Yeshua says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law." And then he says, "Until heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or one stroke of a pen will disappear from the law."
A jot, right. The smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet.
He's saying the law is atomic. It is part of the structure of the universe. As long as the earth is here, the law stands.
And then we flip the page to Paul.
And the language just completely shifts.
Completely. Romans 7, Ephesians 2, Colossians 2. Paul calls the law abolished, done away with, faded away. He talks about blotting out the handwriting of ordinances.
So the source just poses a logic puzzle. How can something be eternal and abolished at the same time?
And people will say, oh, but context. They'll say Yeshua meant the moral law, but Paul meant the ceremonial law.
But the source says that's just a later invention to smooth over this giant crack in the foundation. Yeshua didn't say only the moral parts. He said not one stroke of a pen.
Let's bring this down to earth, though. The source gives a really great, concrete case study.
The barbecue menu.
Food sacrificed to idols. This was a huge issue in the first century. It was how you interacted with pagan culture.
So networking, buying meat at the market, civic festivals.
All of it. You were dealing with idol sacrifices.
So what does the boss say? What's the verdict?
We look at Revelation 2. This is Yeshua speaking to the churches, and he has a massive problem with the teaching of Balaam and Jezebel.
Why?
Specifically because they mislead his servants to eat food sacrificed to idols.
Okay, so that's it's a stumbling block. Forbidden.
Very clear cut. Now, look at Paul in 1 Corinthians 8 and Romans 14. He takes a much more pragmatic approach. He says, look, an idol is just a piece of wood. It's nothing.
So the meat is just meat.
Right. He says we are no worse if we do not eat and no better if we do. He basically says it's fine.
The only time you shouldn't is if a weaker brother is watching and might get offended.
Exactly. So it's not a sin against God. It's a social faux pas.
That's a huge shift. For Yeshua, eating it aligns you with demons. For Paul, not eating it just means you're not enlightened enough to know idols aren't real.
And the source makes a really scathing point here. By Yeshua's definition, Paul is teaching the exact same thing as Balaam and Jezebel.
Permission to eat.
But by Paul's definition, Yeshua himself would be the weaker brother for caring so much.
Oof. Calling the Messiah the weaker brother, that really puts the conflict into perspective.
And it goes beyond just rules. It goes to authority itself. The source points out how Paul seems to just take titles that Yeshua specifically put off limits.
Like father.
Right. In Matthew 23, Yeshua is explicit. Call no man your father on earth. He also says not to be called instructors.
And Paul just ignores that.
In 1 Corinthians 4, he says, I became your father in Christ Jesus. He just takes the title. And in Ephesians, he says, God gave some to be pastors and teachers.
The source argues he's just usurping the authority Yeshua claimed for himself, setting himself up as the middleman.
Speaking of authority, we have to talk about the math problem.
The 13th apostle.
The 13th apostle problem. In Revelation 21, the New Jerusalem has 12 foundations, and on them are the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb.
12, not 13.
Correct. And we know from the book of Acts that Judas was replaced by Matthias. They voted. The circle was closed. 12.
But Paul calls himself an apostle all the time.
He does. So if you accept Paul, you have 13. You have a structural problem. The source basically implies Paul is crashing a party he was not invited to.
I want to pivot to the biggest theological battleground here, which is the how do I get saved question.
The big one.
Because the classic Protestant view is solidified faith alone, and that is straight from Paul.
Oh, yeah. Romans 3.10, there is no one righteous, not even one. Galatians 2.16, man is not justified by works of the law. Paul's whole theology is that humans are broken, they can't follow the law, so the law is a dead end. Only faith saves you.
That sounds great. It's comforting. But the source says the Gospels actually disagree, that no one is righteous.
They do. Just look at Luke 1. It introduces Zechariah and Elizabeth.
John the Baptist's parents.
Right, and it calls them righteous in the sight of God. How?
Because of their faith.
No, the text is explicit, walking blamelessly in all the commandments. This was before Yeshua's death.
Yeah.
So according to Luke, it was possible to be righteous by keeping the Torah.
And then there's the rich young ruler, Matthew 19. A guy walks up to Yeshua and asks point blank, what must I do to enter life? This is the moment for the gospel pitch.
It is. If Paul's theology is correct, Yeshua should say, you can't do anything, just believe in me.
But he doesn't say that.
No. Yeshua's answer is, if you want to enter life, keep the commandments. He points them right back to the Torah.
The source calls this the economics of salvation.
Right. For Yeshua, salvation is expensive. You have to count the cost, you have to sacrifice, you have to do things.
For Paul, salvation is a free gift.
There are two completely different economic models.
Let's talk about the timeline, the end times. Because when someone predicts the end of the world and it doesn't happen, we usually call them a false prophet.
That's the test.
So how does Paul do on the predictive test?
Not well, according to the source. Yeshua warned people in Luke 21 specifically not to listen to anyone who says, the time is at hand.
He says no one knows the day or hour.
And Paul, Romans 13, the day is at hand. He uses the exact phrase Yeshua warned against.
And in 1 Thessalonians?
He famously writes about the rapture, saying, then we who are alive and remain will be caught up.
We who are alive, he thought he was going to be there for it.
He clearly believed he would live to see the return. The source is blunt. Paul gave a timeline. He died. The timeline failed.
The source also points out that Paul isn't just fighting Yeshua. He's often fighting himself. The Paul versus Paul section.
The internal consistency argument.
Yeah.
You find him taking both sides of an issue, depending on the audience.
Like with women in the church.
Exactly. In Galatians 3, it's there is no male or female. Very egalitarian. But in 1 Corinthians 14, it's women should keep silent in the churches.
What about being a people pleaser?
Galatians 1. If I pleased men, I would not be a servant of Christ. Sounds noble. Then 1 Corinthians 10. I try to please all men in everything I do.
The source just argues you can't build a solid foundation on those kinds of contradictions.
So we've got contradictions on law, food, authority, salvation, the end times. And it brings us to the big question, why?
Why is Paul in the Bible?
Exactly. If God is in charge, why allow this stolen Messiah scenario to happen? Why let the weeds take over the garden?
This is where the source goes into what it calls the sod level of interpretation, the secret level.
And it points to a very specific and frankly very scary passage in the Torah, Deuteronomy 13.
The test of the prophet.
Deuteronomy 13 describes a scenario where a prophet or a dreamer arises. And the tricky part is they might even perform signs and wonders. They look legit.
So miracles aren't proof of truth.
Not according to Deuteronomy, because the text says if that prophet then tells you to follow other gods or a path that's different from the commandments, do not listen to them.
And then it gives the reason why.
For your God is testing you.
Testing you to see whether you really love your God with all your heart.
The theory presented by Talmud is that Paul is that divine test. He is the dreamer who performs signs but preaches lawlessness, a path away from the Torah.
That is a mind-bending perspective. It reframes the last 2,000 years of church history as a massive global loyalty test.
It aligns with that metaphor of the room and the veil. The people falling off the balconies, they're failing the test. They accepted the easier version of the religion, the one where the law is abolished and salvation is a free gift.
They chose the religion about Yeshua, not the religion of Yeshua.
The source argues you have to choose. Are you loyal to the king's instructions or to the self-appointed manager's new policy?
Which brings us back to the title, The Stolen Messiah. It implies a theft, like identity theft.
That's the argument. That the Paul described here took the credibility and the name of the Messiah, but stripped away his actual teachings, the Torah, the commandments, and replaced them with his own theology. He stole the king's authority to build his own kingdom.
There is one final image the source leaves us with. And honestly, it's been stuck in my head all week. It's from the parable of the tares.
The weeds in the wheat.
Right. A man sowed good seed wheat in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, an enemy came and sowed weeds tares among the wheat.
And the tares look exactly like the wheat until the harvest.
So the source poses this question. If the field was sown with good seed Yeshua's teaching, but an enemy sowed weeds conflicting teachings like Paul's, while everyone slept, are modern believers eating the wheat? Or have they been surviving on the weeds?
And more importantly, what happens at the harvest?
The harvest is the separation. And if we go back to the beginning, to Matthew 7, the harvest involves rejecting the workers of lawlessness.
The weeds are bundled and burned. The source implies that those following the Pauline version might be shocked to find themselves in the bundle of weeds despite using the master's name.
It forces you to look at the text with fresh eyes, to really read what is there, not just what you've been told is there.
And that's the challenge of the room. Are you willing to lift the veil, even if it means realizing you've been walking in the wrong direction this whole time?
That's where we're going to leave you today. Don't take our word for it. Grab the texts Put them side by side. Be your own forensic accountant. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Keep asking questions.